When a team starts to underperform, the community wants to find someone to blame. They need to pick out who exactly is causing this problem. And me, as a kind and benevolent YouTuber with absolutely no motivations of money or views, I like to do all of the required research to give you that answer, so I can fulfill the community's request, so I can fulfill their desire for hatred. And when I look at MOUZ, the only player you can blame is very obviously it's not really clear entirely. Now, Brawlin is the main player you might look at replacing, but when you look at their T sides, by the way, their CT sides are, I think, the second best in the pro scene or something. They beast CT sides. Their T sides are really, really bad. They've talked about it themselves. They've talked about needing better calling, better voices, better everything, essentially. They need to be better. I mean, they're great, except for they need to work on their entire everything on their T sides, including their communication and their trading and their clutching and their opening. But when you look at the stats of their T sides, the two players that have fallen off into this season are Spinks and Brawlin. And Spinks has fallen off, actually both of them have fallen off quite drastically. Spinks went from something like a 1.1 on T side to now he's below a 1.0. Brawlin went from a 0.98 or so to like a 0.82, despite getting, I think they've both gotten better on their CT sides. And Torji has actually been he's actually improved this season, but you don't really see that talked about because the main talking point when you're talking about MOUZ is their horrifically bad T sides. So with all that preamble out of the way, the problem with their T sides are 3 or 4-fold. I don't think the calling is that great when they have to adjust into the middle of a half. I think they really struggle to change up the pace, change up the tempo, and to find something that works if plan A isn't working. I've really always maintained that Cyclone is a really great game planner. He might be the best out there in my eyes, at least that I've really looked into. But there's a lot more to a T side than just that. And when you look at it, Spinks is kind of the obvious target because of that huge drop off on T sides. He was in a lot of really good situations to begin this year. He was winning them a lot of rounds, and now he's not. But when I watch the games, I don't feel like Spinks is the problem. I feel like he, kind of like Twists on Liquid, was a bit of a band-aid for a problem that already existed. And now that the team is struggling more, I feel like he's that Stewie 2K style player that when things are going wrong, okay, Stewie 2K is a wild player to relate Spinks to, but in this specific mentality of if things are going wrong, he's going to try to change things up to fix it. Now, in this case, I think when it comes to MOUZ, I think sometimes he goes later parts of the half when things aren't going well. He does actually get, despite the argument that, he's too much of a baiter or something that people gave from Vitality, and often lurkers do get a little baity at times. I think when Spinks is in the later parts of a half and things are all going wrong, I think he really does force engagements. He tries to force plays. And in the first half of the first season, especially, he was doing an incredible job of that. He would just run into a bomb site, double entry, turn the half completely around when things were going wrong. Right now, because things are going so wrong for MOUZ, I feel like he's actually being read, and teams know that type of play is coming, and they can actually just be standing there ready to counter it. Now, that's not to say Spinks is the perfect player, but I feel like if MOUZ was having better T sides from, let's say, a Xertion or a Brawlin, I think Spinks' T sides would probably be much closer to what they were in the first season statistically than they are right now, where they just seem like he's the player you would point out if you're talking about just a T side drop off. He's gone from potentially their best player or their second best player to one of their weaker players. So we already saw the previous round. We see this one. He's going for that play out B-apps. His team is completely dead in middle. He doesn't expect Apex to be in market at that timing, which is totally reasonable, by the way. And you could see maybe there's a scenario where he could be jumping out and trying to look at market a little bit. But generally, when your opponents are full stacking middle and you're jumping out B-apps, your main concern is to not die to a player short or to get a kill on a player that comes back from short and tries to check and see what's going on towards apartments. So I can't really blame him for that in any real way. Xertion is actually one of my main culprits for a player that's struggling and might be the problem, despite the fact that his T-sides have only fallen off slightly. I look at his entries, and his entries have gone down by a fairly notable amount in terms of success rate, and that means you're losing a decent amount of rounds just based off the fact that Xerxin isn't getting those kills and you would generally be able to convert a 5v4. But you also have to look at the adjustment with the way the game is being played right now. There's actually a very notable thing I see quite often now on T-side Mirage, where rounds will slow down when teams aren't given kills as the T-side, when they're not given an opening, given an opportunity, and they win an aim duel. They oftentimes, their rounds just kind of peter out. Like there's just too much utility for the CT side. They're too comfortable playing a little passive and holding angles. And then the T sides just don't have, maybe they have too many protocols to take the early. I saw this with Liquid actually a lot last season, or when Twist was calling specifically. They would have so many protocols to take control of areas early on in the round that they would end up with not enough utility to take the bomb site later in the round. So if their opponents just backed up onto the bomb site over time, you would end up with a scenario where they would just be in a bad spot with no way out of it realistically. And that's why you sometimes do actually just have to take risks. But again, I think Xerxin might be a notable culprit. Torji has had some insane games. I think Torji this year, he's not perfectly consistent. He's not the best opera in the world, but I definitely think he's found a way to have a lot more impact this year as opposed to last year in a lot of different situations. Xerxin needs, I remember watching this live and thinking, what the hell is Xerxin doing here? Xerxin has been, it's hard to say. Again, I don't think there's any one player. I don't know what Xerxin was doing there. Actually, I know exactly what he was doing there. Most likely, he thought Torji was posted on CT and didn't realize that Torji wasn't really watching anything at that exact moment. And maybe that's a Torji problem, but certainly it's absolutely a communication problem if that is what Xerxin was thinking. It's possible Xerxin was also just kind of... Sometimes you end up going brain AFK, like you throw something and you're not really thinking, you peek out and you're just dead. But that's one where... if that round had been lost, I think you would have had to put it on Xerxin in that scenario based on the way he played that. If he had just survived, they would have been in a pretty good spot. But I made the preamble at the beginning of the video, by the way, specifically because I don't think there's any one thing you can point at and say is the problem with MOUZ. Spinks was a bit of a band-aid at times earlier on. He's no longer that band-aid. Brawlin's calling I don't think was ever perfect, and it's being kind of more noticed when you look to a more CT-sided meta. Spinks was having some incredible overperformances when it came to just kind of crazy mid-half, like aggressive plays to bring their T-sides back into it, and he's no longer having that. Like, it's this compilation of problems. But here, they go for what is a... I mean, keep in mind, I'll say the precursor to this game is the previous game, or one of the previous games that MOUZ played, it might have been a couple of games before, was on Mirage against M80. And they got absolutely picked apart by Slacks in middle. They lost, I think they got 10-2'd on opening duels. They simply could not, and by the way, I feel like surely there's a better or alternative play to what Brawlin did here than get shot at by ZywOo, pull out a nade and nobody's covering and he just peeks out and nobody's like, this is a there's some sort of problem with that play. He either thinks that there's a player Palace that is going to punish ZywOo, but it's smoked off, or he thinks that Xerxin is going to be peeking to ensure a trade, or he just thinks, I mean, ZywOo more often than not probably backs up there because maybe Torji actually is supposed to be posted on it, but I think Torji's lining up a flash, right? So it just becomes this awkward spot where they're not all on the same page, and that's not what you want to be seeing from a MOUZ squad at all, is it? But I don't know where I was. I got lost. I'm lost now. Okay, back on topic. They were getting destroyed by Slacks on their defaults. They literally could not default without starting the round 4v5, and a lot of teams are having this type of problem, especially against Vitality. Vitality is one of the teams that is... Oh my god, that Molly was so... Dude. Oh, that's just like MOUZ's T-sides this season in a nutshell. It's not even this season. It's actually, I think the last month and a half of last season, their T-sides were also quite criminally bad. But very notably, when you come into this season and they continue being poor, it's very obvious how things are going badly. because they weren't capable of playing rounds out without going down into a 4v5, and when rounds slow down, again, I'll probably highlight this with G2 because I think Hunter, I don't want to say Hunter's getting overrated, but I think there are problems in Hunter's calling that haven't yet been developed that are being masked by some really good preparation. They're doing a lot of defaults into executes or early round execs. When things slow down, they struggle. MOUZ have the same problem, and they can't start out without being 4v5, so they're going to end up going for a lot of execs in this game. And I think because of the previous game that was played by MOUZ, you could probably have predicted this if you were Vitality. I think they were probably ready for the pivot into heavy execute style CS from MOUZ early on. And in being ready for that, it made it a lot tougher for MOUZ, right? You just have Vitality being in a lot of the right situations at the right time. But skipping over this force buy, and by force buy I mean not a force buy at all. That was an eco, definitely an eco. We go into the following gun round, and they actually try to overwhelm towards mid, all 5 players, and get something done. At least they can trade out if something goes wrong, if someone tries to go for an individual rifle play. Although I do generally subscribe to the idea that if 4 players in an area isn't going to win you the round, then 5 shouldn't be really any different. That's why I think 4-1s have always been quite successful, as opposed to 5-0s, not exactly rolling off the tongue in quite the same way. You probably haven't heard too many 5-0s other than the classic Rush B that is often in fact a 4-1, not a 5-0, because you can maintain some map control or lurk with the other player. But here's a round that slows down, and Vitality are holding on to quite a bit of utility. This is what I'm talking about. They've got a molly on ZywOo. They've got a smoke for the ramp player. Apex has a smoke as well, so they could end up smoking off towards connector a little later if they want to. There's 45 seconds left, and you have good utility on MOUZ, actually, to go for a play, but there's no perfect way. If you have this setup, so the setup that is being used on A lot of the time now, where teams are like smoking this off, and they're smoking this off, and they have a guy here playing for that angle, is very effective. Or they're smoking this off and they have a guy pivoting around on balcony, a little less effective. I'm talking about covering this guy to be watching this angle. But a lot of the setups being played on A make it very hard for ramp to get anything done. And if you have to avoid ramp or be worried about peeking it because an opera could be posted here, then it's a lot easier for this opera to get a lot done, or players at jungle or on stairs to get things done dealing with connector. And all of this ends with the idea that it's actually quite hard to go from just mid control into an A hit, because you have to come up connector, and the only real way to deal with this angle here with utility is to flash it off and then post on it, and that's still tough because he can peek from the bottom or the top, or he can peek from the side of triple, right? And a lot of operas are playing here, which is even harder to deal with if you don't have a player that can pop out of Palace and just shoot him in the side. It's extremely hard to deal with. This is like, I think Na'Vi was the original team that started coming up with that position. There used to be a smoke you could throw on top of triple that would block that opera ticket, but it was never like the most common, most popular play. A lot of the times you just end up having to be in a spot where you have to just kind of gamble it. You have to end up coming through this smoke, or you have to walk out and just hope that the opera isn't ready, and you have to frag out. And in this case, you had the double up towards a ramp. You have Jimmy on the other side. He actually gets a pretty good tag. Almost it would have been a very round-changing scenario if he had found that kill in a Flames. And he definitely could have found that kill in Apex. Apex took a couple extra shots, but Jimmy just wasn't at all ready for it. But this is how a lot of rounds, I mean, I just took so long when I could have just showed you the round, couldn't I? This is how I've seen a lot of rounds recently develop, where nothing happens in mid, and the CTs kind of have the choice. Because they can play this passive style, sometimes they'll overwhelm in mid, and they'll make it so you, as Ts, have to be using your utility in mid effectively. But if you do use your utility in mid effectively, then you end up in this spot where you go into the late round, and you might not have enough utility, or because they overwhelmed in mid that round, they didn't have control of Palace, which they really needed control of if they wanted to be going for that A play, and they tried to force it, and it simply didn't work. But a lot of the time what ends up happening is you just don't have the utility or the ability to use that utility to take the bomb site in any effective way when you have, operas that are playing default so often, re-smokes for top con at uncomfortable timings, a player ticket that's so effective, so good at dealing with those sorts of plays, right? There's just so many options that the CTs have. It feels like it just lined up. Like, it doesn't feel like the change in economy, the tiny change in economy we have now, it really should have made this big of a difference. It feels like it kind of lined up with the understanding of the game, but maybe an extra smoke on any given gun round does actually make the difference. Maybe that is what changes things, where you can hold on to your utility just a little bit longer. But ZywOo on the A site hold, I mean, Flames gets the kill on Xerxin as they're making their way out, because what happened towards Palace? They're smoked off Palace right at the beginning of the round, which means Flamesy, he sees the smokes blooming, he can just pop his way through, or like he can just go for a quick peek from the top stairs. Nobody's posted. It's a little uncomfortable to be posted there. They didn't have the money for an op, so there's not that much you can do other than win the aim duels. And then ZywOo just picks them apart from triple, because he knows, I think in this case, he just knows that the MOUZ mid Mirage default is very, very weak. So there's not that much reason to expect it to be happening all that often. And when you have a team, you can kind of, again, you can call their bluff. If they have a default, teams, dude, you would see teams doing this in like Maine in like 20, wait, what is that nade? That nade's so sick. Oh my God. How have I not seen that? I've definitely seen that nade before and just not realized. I think I've seen that nade and I've assumed that it went out the window, but it's actually landing below the door. That's actually sick. Okay. You would see this in like ESEA Maine in like 2013. Like, teams would they would be very good at taking mid control, but they couldn't do anything from that mid control, and you just call their bluff, play a back passive setup from the beginning of the round, and go from there. And I think that's what Vitality are ready to do here. And again, a few teams I've seen struggle with that transition from mid control into a bomb site hit, and it feels like that's becoming more common this season than it was last season. So in this case, they finally go for the contest in middle, and it actually goes quite well for MOUZ. And that's why you don't necessarily always want to be contesting middle every single round. You try and catch them off guard with an aggressive play. I think actually MOUZ was caught a little in the open, a couple of their players, but the shots weren't hit by Vitality to capitalize on that. But you actually have the rotate into the double up on B for Vitality. So they're actually in the right setup to hold this exact play, except for Xerxin might have won them the round regardless, but they're in the right setup, the double up on B, to hold that exact play, and they just aren't able to do so. They're maybe a half second late, where if that player got out market tiny bit earlier, you end up in a spot where Vitality actually could have 9-3'd the half, but you don't need to 9-3. 8-4 is still a pretty comfortable lead going into the second half. As much as you'll be told that the maps are more CT-sided, I think 8-4 is still a pretty comfortable lead on CT-side Mirage at the current moment in time. But triple nades into window, you actually have kind of a wild setup here for MOUZ on the first gun round. Again, their CT sides are actually quite strong. I mean, they do a really good job on their CT sides. Spink's doing exactly what Flamesy did in the previous round that we watched, going for that peek from stairs. When Palace is smoked off, that stairs peek is extremely dangerous to try and deal with. And it's kind of awkward to hold too, because of the way, you know, that player he's peeking over somewhat of a headshot angle for some of the spots. Unless you're posted on it with an op, it's actually quite a tough and uncomfortable angle to hold. I wanted to skip this round actually, but it looks like they lose it. So in classic MOUZ fashion, in a situation to come back in the game, and they're going to fumble it. Who would have guessed that MOUZ would fumble a winnable scenario against Vitality? I really do. I feel like they have a bit of a it's almost like Liquid Astralis. Although I think the gap between MOUZ and Vitality is larger than the gap was actually between Liquid Astralis. If you look at 2019, especially Liquid, where they were dominate. Well, to be honest, 2018 Liquid was also dominating almost basically everyone in the scene. I want to stop for a second. 2018 Liquid might be one of the most underrated teams of all time, because they were unbelievably dominant. 2018, 2019 Liquid, they were unbelievably dominant against everyone except for Astralis. Like, Astralis was like the team they lost to. I suppose, who would that compare to? Like, I think Na'Vi, wasn't last year's Na'Vi only losing to Spirit? Or no? Who am I thinking of? Was it MOUZ last year? I don't know. 2018, 2019 Liquid was unbelievably dominant. Very underrated team. But Apex, 8 health, misses a shot. Xerxin goes for the swing. It feels like Xerxin might have been expecting that Brawlin was going to peek out from like top ticket. Does he need to be like, okay, he crosses over and he just goes for the dry peek back out. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I overanalyze because you do have to just take engagements sometimes. Sometimes you just have to accept that you need to take a straight up gunfight and you have to win it against someone with inferior firepower. However, I do feel like he's got a flash. Could he not just throw the flash over mid? Wouldn't that make it a little bit more comfortable? You know the guy has a scout. Obviously, you think you're going to get the kill anyways, especially if you think he doesn't have armor or if you think that he's lit. You might have that information already. But at the same time, does it hurt you to flash over mid there? I suppose it buys a little bit of time where you're thinking someone could walk through the smoke. But if you do it at the right moment, how does Brawlin not get the kill onto Apex there? This guy's with 8 health just got a kill and a tag, and then they take CT spawn control, and Torji's on the rotation over. I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh on their CT sides because their CT sides are actually quite good, but it just feels like that's one of those rounds where you have to find a way to not let that happen, whatever the way is. You know, is Brawlin maybe peeking from Ticket, but that's risky because someone can pop out Palace, but maybe Xerxin crosses, does a quick peek towards Palace, and Brawlin jumps on top of Ticket and they double peek or something. That would feel pretty natural. Or Xerxin just tosses a flash over before he peeks out against the scout that he knows is there. Or maybe they just do that. Maybe that's the right play. Maybe that's the right play. I'm questioning it. I don't really, it doesn't feel like it, but maybe it is. Still, 9-7, very much winnable. They're on the CT side. You know, Vitality, they've had some struggles on their T sides as well. ZywOo has been a little absent, although you can argue if it's a ZywOo problem or if it's more of a team issue where they're not creating the space that they used to on their T sides. I'd say that if you were to talk to me about this from this scoreline, MOUZ, like, you know, MOUZ is playing against someone, they're playing against the top team, and they have a 9-7 disadvantage on CT side Mirage. I'd feel like I'm pretty comfortable with that for MOUZ. I'd say it's maybe a 50-50 game. And you got the rotate from Jimmy, he picks up the 1. 2024 Jimmy gets 2. That's all I'm saying. 2024 Jimmy gets 2 there because it's so damn hard to see through that molly. Torji misses a shot. I'm gonna assume it was a tough shot because I like Torji, and if it was Cadian though, I would assume it was a really easy shot and he whiffed it because I don't like Cadian. Actually, I do like Cadian, but I don't like his overrated. The clutch is so overrated, man. You can never accuse Cadian of hitting every boring. Oh my, Torji dies to the bomb. This is like MOUZ against, they're just crumbling, dude. It's just, they have everything they need to win. It's just, I said this on broadcast at some point. I think specifically about MOUZ. I did say this specifically about MOUZ. There's only so long you can be second best for, or like, you know, second, third best, where like you're beating almost everyone, but you can't make that next step. I feel like that is actually staying that good while not getting the results is one of the hardest mental battles out there. And eventually I feel like teams historically have crumbled over time. You give them enough of those hard defeats where they're just not able to do it, and eventually they're going to crumble. And I feel like that win over Vitality at Cologne into the losing the final was that moment where it was just like, wow, even when we beat Vitality, we don't have what it takes to get past that. That's kind of what the vibe I get from MOUZ going into this tournament. And we've got a triple up on 8, like just perfect read. They're in the perfect spots. But Xerxin doesn't hit the shot. I want to see this Xerxin play again because, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's like an easy. He gets a nice nade. He should be getting that kill on Mezzi. Like, if we look at that from Mezzi's POV, I'm confident he should be getting this kill on Mezzi, surely. Mezzi just pulling his gun out. Yeah, he's got to get that kill every time. He gets that kill on Mezzi, then this is a completely different round, and the round probably goes their way. And I think that's why, that's one of the reasons, I mean, Xerxin is probably the guy that I think is the biggest fall off and thereby kind of contributing factor in terms of individual play towards their struggles on T sides especially. He was a really good entry opening style player last year. I think it was a little bit less effective this year. Actually, I think it was fairly similar this year. But then you go into the second season and he falls off, not like a ton, he's not like terrible, but he's just not doing quite as well. And the team is struggling to adapt to that. And he's missing some kills he really should be getting. So now this time Torji, as much as I think Apex said in this game, no, he said in a different game. There was a game Apex played recently where he said, I played terrible. And I was like, yeah, you didn't get the kills, but you actually made some really game-winning plays. This is one of those game-winning plays where he just, what, does he walk through Palace? Does he like, he doesn't run the whole way, surely. He runs up till here, walks at the last possible moment. Brawlin, this is one where he might know that Brawlin sometimes throws this palace smoke a little bit late, and because he knows that smoke gets thrown a little bit late, when he had the spawn, he knew he could beat it, because he has the best spawn here, right? This is a spawn-based play. Apex knows he has the spawn. He knows he can get a couple steps ahead, further forward, and he can go for this peek. And at the same time, they're coming through connectors. So he probably didn't expect necessarily to catch someone on stairs, but to catch someone in jungle rotating from window to connector, or someone stairs that is trying to deal with the player's connector, but is then trapped in both from both directions. Really nice call. I mean, I give credit to this one. Last round, I think Xerxin, if he hits that shot, they're in the right setup and they win the round. This one, I think that's just a really solid call, and possibly just a gap in the defense that MOUZ have and Vitality were able to spot out, which I give a lot of credit to Cyclone. I think he has a lot of really great game plans, but I think Xtaz and Apex have some really great game plans as well, where they just find these small little gaps in the defenses or the attack of certain teams, and they just make slight adjustments to catch them off guard, and they use them at the right time. They use them in that pivotal round. They don't waste that knowledge, that kind of like small gap that might give them a 5-10% edge. They don't waste it on a nothing burger round. They use it like in that pivotal round that decides the game. Like that round, if MOUZ win it, they would be 11-8. They still have a good chance of coming into this one, but they lose that one. And if they lose that one, they're kind of screwed. And another really well-timed trade here, actually, from, like, let's watch this from Brawlin's POV. You have Spinks, Brawlin blocks onto Apex, but he's also getting shot from the side. He actually gets killed from the side. Because he had a FAMAS, I don't know if he necessarily would have killed Apex. If he had a M4, he definitely kills Apex there. He had the drop on him at least a little bit. But you have the initial player coming out. You have Zywoo behind. And you have Mezzy, who I assume is going to get this kill on Torji. Yeah, Mezzy gets the kill on Torji. And they're just in the right spots at the right times. Like the explosiveness of this play. Like if you're Torji, you got your nade, you're trying to do your thing, you peek out, 2 players shooting at you. Actually, 3 players could have been shooting at him. Then you get swung on from jungle by Xerxin, or Xerxin gets swung on by Apex, and then you end up in a 4v1 in the span of like 2 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds. You go from a 5v5 to a 1v4 just because like one player is it really feels like MOUZ is just kind of one player, one bullet too short, too late in a lot of these scenarios, especially against Vitality, where they miss if they hit that bullet a little faster, or they have one player there a second faster, they're in a winnable spot. But I got a little sidetracked here. I don't even know where I went, where I came from. All this to say, statistically, I think Spinks is the player you might point to as having the biggest drop-off on their T sides, but I don't think it's necessarily him playing worse that's causing the problem. I think he's trying to solve a problem with struggles from Xerxin and struggles from Brawlin, both individually and in terms of calling for their T sides. I think those two things are pretty obviously linked when your players are struggling to get openings. Plus the shift in the meta towards a little more CT sided, they've really struggled to adjust. Spinks tries his best to compensate for that, but isn't hitting the same shots he was last season. So what's the problem for MOUZ? There's a lot of problems for MOUZ. There's a lot of them.